Oh, I do have it. Bobby, thanks for joining us.
No problem. I'm very.
Yeah, we got plenty of people here.
Yeah.
I made it here from this time.
Yay. Did you come from the CDN?
We have 3 missing.
I came from work.
So I'm going to call the roll. I've already taken your roll. What are you waving at me for? Oh, hi, sir. Glad you're here. Vision, Unified Comprehensive and Effective EMS Trauma System for the Healthy, Safe Texas. And you can see our mission on there. The first is the Pediatric Recognition Program report, Sam Vance. Sam is here. I sent y'all the link. Hopefully you've all had a chance to review this.
Since I'm also doing the assessment, do you mind if I just sit here?
Yes, you can sit there. You can sit anywhere you want, so you can sit here if you'd like.
Well, this will be all right.
It's good enough for government work.
Yeah. So, as you know, back in last August, I presented to you all the Voluntary Pediatric EMS Recognition Program. And that program was developed by a work group that we had that was made up of myself, Dr. Shaw, our program director, State EMS Director Joe Schmieder, Dr. Dominic Lucia, who's the Emergency Department Medical Director of McLean Children's Hospital, Scott and White, Diana Krause, who's the Trauma Program Director for Dell Children's, Chris Alexander, who is now the former Chief of San Marcos Hays County EMS, and Ed Norman, who is a firefighter paramedic with Stafford Fire and Rescue. And this program is a voluntary multi-phase recognition program for EMS agencies who want to establish programs and standards to improve their capabilities to deliver care to pediatric patients. It's based on programs that have been developed in 3 other states. That's Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Nebraska. And since August, I've received lots of feedback from all of you on the committee here, which has been incorporated into the program, and all of your feedback has been great and deeply appreciated. Since then, the leadership of RAC-A has agreed to pilot the program, and RAC-A is all on board with this, and they're anxious to pilot it. And the EMS committee at RAC-E has also volunteered to pilot the program. And I've been contacted by numerous EMS agencies and air medical agencies across the state that are anxious to start participating in this. DSHS has even stepped up to the plate and has agreed to help us and RAC-A by helping with some of the costs associated with the decals for the ambulances. The Air Medical Committee, which met yesterday, they're in the process of developing an equipment list for the helicopters for us using CAME's guidelines. And they're actually going to have a special meeting here coming up to work on that a little more for us. I can also tell you that the draft of this program is already on the National Association of State EMS Officials website, and it's being used as a model for other states to develop similar programs. That New York, Michigan, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Tennessee are all using it to develop programs in their own states. So as we move forward with this program, I would like to ask you all for your endorsement of it. I know that at the February meeting, a vote was taken but was chosen to hold off until you all had an opportunity to look at it a little bit more. And barring any further discussion or input on the program, would like to ask for the Medical Directors Committee's endorsement of the program.
So moved.
Move second. Any discussions?
Nope. I think it's my folks are working on it and making sure our ducks are in a row. So.
I actually have concerns about it because it is counting gauze pads again. It has what we've said we don't want for a long time, which is required equipment list. So actually because of that, I'm opposed to it. Aside from the fact that the thought of yet another visit for another survey for another specialty area bothers me. I have problems with the equipment list in it, so I'm not going to necessarily try to sway people's votes, but I will tell you that I'm going to vote against it. So.
But it's truly voluntary.
So's Medicare.
Yeah. Well, nobody said there weren't incentives associated with the process.
So I do have a question. Why are there adult things on your pediatric recognition? I mean, I noticed some of the medications, for instance, you know, there are some medications you have on your list to carry that many EMS services are pulling off. So what do you do in instances where there is a difference in what protocol standing versus what is on your recognition list?
Well, so we did include language in the program taken directly from the 2014 Joint Policy Statement that states that equipment requirements will vary depending on the certification levels of the providers, local medical direction, and jurisdiction, population densities, geographic and economic conditions of the region, and other factors. So I personally think that kind of covers what you're asking about.
Okay. Now, one other question I had is for organizations like mine, who is in multiple different racks. Do I have to do this in each rack? Because it says that the rack will be the one who does this visit. So each rack I'm in, do I have to apply for this recognition in each individual rack? Or how do I do that, especially when you're talking about for the higher levels of community outreach and education, do I have to do it all over? Is it one area? Because it's not well defined in that process.
Well, I think in a circumstance like that, now I'll take that back to our work group to get their input on it. So I really would hesitate on giving my personal opinion, but personally, I would think that if it's all Acadian, correct?
Yes.
Just want to make sure I'm getting the right department here. That if at the main level of Acadian, if it was all incorporated throughout the entire service, no matter what rack they were in, I think you would be okay. But like I said, I'll take that back to our work group and get their input on it.
Well, that's a question I had because obviously I think it's a great idea. I am concerned the way it's written that we would have to do it. Not only Bobby says one visit, but we'd have to have one additional visit in all these different racks. So.
Right. And like I said, I'll be honest, we didn't think about a service like yours that covers all those different areas. But I think that's a good question and can take it back to the work group.
Yeah. Bill and I, and I think Steve's
Yeah.
got multiple agencies and multiple different racks also.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right, we have a motion, a second. All those in favor, raise your hands because I have to count. Yeah. Oh, well, I meant questions and comments. I'm sorry.
That's what it sounded like you said.
I thought it said. No, questions, any other questions and comments?
Christine Reeves, Heart of Texas, RAC. As a RAC, so East Texas is in my region. I'm going to pick on Dr. Moore. It's also in G and I think still in E. And I would like to see that if they were doing this as the RAC that's not their home RAC, absolutely I would want to know. And I would want to be involved and know that the same stuffs are on all the trucks. It's not like I have to go do another visit. But would I want them to be involved in pediatric community outreach? Absolutely. I wouldn't want them only to do it in G. I mean, so that's an opinion of me as a RAC. If you're going to be pediatric recognized, choose to go this voluntary route, then I would think that you would need to be involved in pediatrics in both or all the areas, because it's not you necessarily as the medical director, it's your personnel. So while Dr. Moore is in two areas, I wouldn't expect him to necessarily be at all of our community events, but would I expect East Texas as one of my bigger providers to be involved? Absolutely. I would want them to be involved, and I would urge them to be involved. So I just wanted to say that before y'all vote, and I know how Dr. Greenberg feels, but
I'm not that passionate.
I'm a little passionate.
Well, I tell you, in that instance, then becomes a concern for an agency like mine, because then I'm pediatric recognized in these areas, but not in these areas, and that's.
But why wouldn't you be in all your? I guess I wouldn't see why you wouldn't be in all your areas.
Well, because
It's not about the medical director.
it's not about the medical director, first of all. But second of all, every rack is different on what goes on in the organization. So sure, I can hold a CPR class in the rack, but there's also 20 other organizations that are holding CPR classes. So does it do well? Is that a real good use of resources to repeat something that's already available throughout a RAC area? So that, I know that's an example, but it mentions CPR classes in there.
Which
So
I think is an example, if I remember
It,
correctly.
it's just an example.
And,
It's
and I'm
not-
just using that as an example.
Sure.
But what I want you
but
to be
even-
involved in a pediatric, in the PHTLS, in doing, pediatric additional training for other providers participating in. I would look at you to just have that on your side of your truck, and when you're at an event, like several we do. I mean, I guess I just see you guys I see that the trucks and the units that are in the areas, not their home district, are already participating in now. I mean, when my services looked at it, half of my services belong somewhere else and we're just another area. But all those services already participate in everything we do RAC-wide anyway. So, I mean, I may be lucky, but, I mean, CareFlight's in my area, and East Texas, and Capital, and Scott and White, Coryell Memorial. So, that's why I'm passionate about making sure I wouldn't want it to only be the home area. I think that would make it like the other areas aren't as important.
So my hope would be is the committee goes back and looks at these questions and attempts to resolve and answer those. From the RAC perspective, I think we have a lot of community-wide education programs that could be inclusive and acceptable to those conditions, like we do for chest pain center accreditation, stroke center accreditation, all of those sorts of things where EMS is engaged and involved. And as far as the multiple agencies and multiple or entities in multiple RAC areas, I think you guys can go back and look at that and come up with a reasonable solution and provide that, where it's not onerous on the institutions or EMS agencies to provide that service and things. So our hope is that you'll be reasonable and actionable in your activities and find what works best, because it is a voluntary program to enhance the pediatric care of our population. Is really your intent, right?
Right, exactly, and any of the inspections that are going to be done, obviously we are going to ask the folks doing that to use common sense and good judgment in doing those, and we'll, if they have any questions while they're there, that they can obviously give us a call for any guidance or direction. This is, I don't want to say that you're trying to make it too hard, but
So I think one of the issues is that there's a little history with things like this, and I understand Dr. Greenberg's concern about
And Dr.
counting
Eloise.
things that don't matter. I think what we've done, other accrediting agencies, so I'm very much in support of recognition as a concept, but I think it would be very helpful if you could focus on capabilities instead of specific equipment. So you have the capability to do something. And I realize that's not as straightforward. The reason we count widgets is because widgets are easy to count. That doesn't mean that that's really getting at what we need to do. So I'm willing to support the concept and the recognition, but I think we can, understanding that this is it's a brand new process and it's going to need refinement. I would ask that during the refinement process, you look at trying to verify the capabilities for performing the appropriate functions as opposed to the widget counting widgets.
One thing that I noticed in the last committee was that some of the data showed that there needs to be some improvement. There were like 20% of our ALS units in Texas of the one survey that didn't carry BVMs for neonates. Or
actually,
ET2
I'll
less
cover
than
that.
2.5.
I'll cover that here in just a few minutes with the new assessment data.
But I mean, that's the data we need to hear, I think, before we make the vote, because that's the part that shows there needs to be improvement.
Well, I will tell you just right off the bat here, the area that is in need of the biggest improvement is the neonatal equipment.
Okay.
Our smallest equipment is where our departments are lacking at. Otherwise, to be honest, for the most part, our departments are doing pretty good at carrying all the equipment.
Yeah, but neonatal, you just opened a whole nother can of worms there, because to what gestational age? 24 weeks. I mean, we have early 20 weekers delivered in the back of the ambulance all the time, and I mean, I don't know that there's.
Well,
much that any EMS agency is prepared to do to
We're
something that
talking
small.
neonatal mass.
Yeah, and that's...
No, but it mentions neonatal equipment in there also.
Well, the perfect example, which I'll show you in the slide set here in a little bit, only 75% of our BLS ambulances carry neonatal masks for the ambu bags. Now, if you get a call for an imminent delivery on the side of the highway and you show up and that baby's delivered and they're not breathing, how you gonna ventilate them? Because I, for one, ain't doing mouth-to-mouth on a baby that was just born. Because, you know, that's pretty gross, and I ain't doing it. So I would like to have a neonatal mask to do it. And I believe, without having the slide pulled up here, only 78% of our ALS trucks have them. So that's just one example.
Sam, to be clear, the equipment that's recommended is per the national policy statement guidelines, correct?
It
That
is.
ASCOT put out. So
it's-
this is not a new standard. I mean, this is really following a national standard put out by ASCOT and NHTSA, correct?
It is. It's the national standard from the 2014 Joint Policy Statement of Equipment on Ground Ambulances that was developed by American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Emergency Physicians, the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma, the EMS for Children program, the Emergency Nurses Association, the National Association of EMS Physicians, and the National Association of State EMS Officials.
And then can you also comment on, you know, how if other states are doing this or what their programs may or may not look like? And
Yeah, so like I said before you were here, that our program is based off of the ones that are being done in Missouri, Pennsylvania, and in Nebraska. We've just taken it and kind of tweaked it a little bit for Texas. Because if you remember, with the bronze level is basically the equipment and the protocols, and we're doing that on an honor system where folks will do that on their own and just fill out an affidavit saying, yes, we carry this and have these protocols. Whereas in, at least in Missouri, I can't speak for Pennsylvania or Nebraska, but at least in Missouri, the inspection process took place at that point in time. It's just obviously we don't have, as large as this state is, we don't have the resources to do that.
and then are there other states that are modeling programs or creating programs?
There is, and I mentioned that as
Okay.
well, that yes, I believe it's New York, Michigan, Louisiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee are all developing programs modeled after this one.
And to be clear, this is a program that would not be initiated by the state, but this is one that would be through the EMS for Children program and or facilitated through the RAC. So this is not a state requirement that there be statewide participation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then in terms of that participation, it is always, the idea is for this to be voluntary too.
Yes, 100% voluntary. There's no plans now or in the future to make this statute, rule, or mandatory.
Yeah, and that you, the program can move forward with this regardless of our endorsement of the current.
That is true.
Okay. So it would seem like it might be in our best interest to try to make sure that if they're going to move forward with this anyway, that we maybe make some recommendations as to how we would like this to look, so that maybe we can do this together to make it look the way we want. So I would make a move that we try to support this with whatever amendments or revisions that we would have, and if that be, not counting widgets, as Dr. Jarvis suggested, or whatever that might be, that we try to create a program that would be mutually acceptable.
So we have a motion and a second already on the table here. We had discussions. Now, if you would like to turn to your left to the gentleman who would like to adjust his motion.
I think you accommodate that with the current motion for enforcement, and we have faith in the MSAC program and things that are associated with that to make those appropriate changes.
Okay.
And things.
All right. So are there any other people in the room standing in the back drinking water that would like to say anything? No. All right.
I was just curious if Dr. Remick had JD after her name with all those leading questions. She was pretty good.
All right. So now let's hands for
ask
The
for
motion, please. Those for the motion, can I see your hand so I can count? All right, those against the motion, can I count? How do we have a?
No, it passes.
It passed, so you're 5, so 5 to 4.
Yeah, 5 to
Okay,
4.
5 to 4 passes, sorry. One abstain.
Chair only votes in case of a tie.
I know. All right, Sam, next.
All righty, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this here.
The decision to buy the state of Alaska only won by 1 vote as well.
Did it really?
So,
We
yeah, that was a
decided
good
to make
vote.
Alaska a
Yeah.
state?
yeah. When we had that choice.
They only had 3 people. Student.
All righty, so in 2010 and 11, the Health Resources Services Administration, HRSA, along with the National EMS for Children program, wanted to do an assessment of our EMS agencies across the country to see how well we're doing in meeting the performance measures of having pediatric online medical direction, offline medical direction, and carrying essential pediatric equipment and supplies. So in 2013, they wanted to do a reassessment to see if we're doing any better, any worse, or have stayed the same since the initial assessment. Across the state of the country, we had 48 states, including the District of Columbia, and 5 territories that participated in the reassessment. Nationally, there were over 8,000 EMS agencies that participated for a nationwide response rate of 83.1%. Since we have so many agencies in the state of Texas, they allowed us to do a random sample survey. We submitted the names of 1,067 EMS and first responder organizations to the National EMS for Children Data Analysis Resource Center, which helped with the data gathering and analysis for the survey. Their computer randomly selected 459 agencies to participate. Out of those, we had 326 respond for a response rate of 71%. There was only one other state, which was Virginia, that assessed more ambulance services than we did, and they assessed 498. This map here shows, represents the number of ALS units that responded per ALS agencies. And as you can see, we did receive a pretty good sampling that's pretty representative of the entire state. This question pertained to Performance Measure 71, online medical direction, of those who attempted to contact online medical direction when treating a pediatric patient, which defined for this assessment was 0 to 18 years old. How often was medical direction available to provide medical advice to your providers? As you can see, we were a little less than what the national average is. But personally, I'd like to take a look at the comparison data of Texas from 2011 to 2014. You can see that our BLS agencies went from 71.4% to almost 89% of our BLS agencies that now have pediatric online medical direction available. Additionally, our ALS agencies, you can see that they went from 81% to 86% of our ALS agencies now have pediatric online medical direction available to them. Performance Measure 72 has to do with offline medical direction, which basically has to do with if an agency has written protocols available to your providers for the treatment of pediatric patients. And how often are these protocols physically available in the vehicle or are carried by your providers during an emergency call? You can see that we are slightly above the national average in having offline medical direction, having adopted pediatric protocols, and having them available while on the scene of a call. So they are currently in the process of developing performance measures for future usage, and since we know that the majority of our services have pediatric protocols, they're probably going to be assessing the quality of those protocols as far as determining if you're using actual evidence-based guidelines or not. Which, just as a reminder, we do have evidence-based guidelines that are available as part of our pediatric protocol resource toolkit on our website. which are asthma, bronchiolitis, and croup, air transportation of pre-hospital trauma patients, analgesia and trauma, pain management, seizure management, and external hemorrhage control.
So I have a question about this actually to the state. Sorry, Joe.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. So if this is true, how come these people still have EMS licenses? Because that's, either one of those breaks the provider licensing rules.
Fully agree.
So
So I guess
Help me out
the
here.
real question is the person answering the survey, did they know what they were answering? Because they would be in complete violation right now if they weren't doing this.
Right.
He also said they sent first responder names. First responders aren't required to have the protocols.
Good point.
That is true, and
That is a good
that
point.
was a HRSA guideline that they wanted to include first responder organizations in the assessment. So.
Yeah, it should be split up.
So let's see, as far as the departments that have offline medical direction, you can see that for our BLS agencies, they went from 70% to 73% that have offline medical direction available, and our ALS agencies went from almost 93% to 96.5% of the agencies that currently have offline medical direction
I'm not going
available.
to beat a dead horse.
It's the same answer.
Well, it's the same man. Yeah, you have to have a medical director. So
For ALS.
yeah.
BLS.
If you kick the dead horse enough, you can get it to move.
But still, for a BLS who does not require, a first responder, BLS first responder does not have to have medical
Correct.
director or protocol or anything.
Correct. And I-
ALS should,
Yeah, probably what we're stuck on is a provider means an ambulance.
yes.
Yeah, and again, that's a HRSA.
Right, I got you.
So, and unfortunately, they would not let us separate that out. So, because nationwide, that the majority of the other states participating, their first responder organizations are a little more involved at the state level. So,
Does that mean they transport?
do they transport?
Yeah.
No. This is strictly they're talking about first responders that respond to the scene of the call, and the reason why they wanted to evaluate them is because they can potentially be on the scene 20 to 30 minutes or longer prior to that ambulance ever arriving. So they wanted to make sure that those organizations have the ability to take care of kids as well. So this represents Performance Measure 73, which is the equipment carried on the trucks. This percentage is the percentage of equipment that these vehicles are carrying. So as far as the BLS vehicles, our BLS vehicles carry 90%, or I'm sorry, almost 92% of the recommended, no, I was looking at the wrong thing, 90% of the equipment, and our ALS vehicles carry 96% of the recommended equipment. However, the one caveat here, this was based on the 2009 joint policy statement. It was not based on the 2014 policy statement that the recognition program is based off of. So just letting you know that. But you can see that as far as the equipment is concerned, we have pretty much stayed the same or gone slightly up as far as the percentage of equipment that we are carrying. So that's a good thing. Now, as far as the least frequently carried piece of equipment, as I talked about a little while ago, on our BLS trucks, only 75% of them are carrying the neonatal size mask. And these are listed in what are considered order of importance: suction catheters in these various sizes, nasal airways in those various sizes, and the pediatric pulse oximeter probes. Then as far as our ALS vehicles are concerned, only 79% of them are carrying the neonatal size mask for the ambu bags. And those that have intubation in their scope of practice, you can see those smaller size tubes are some of the least frequently carried equipment. And then the nasal airways in the following sizes. So the most common reason listed for not carrying the recommended equipment, and this was in 2011 and in 2014, was because the state doesn't require it. And and Joe chuckles because we've had our discussions. But as we move forward with the revision of Rule 157, EMS for Children program would advocate that neonatal size equipment should be included in the rule to ensure that that necessary equipment for our most vulnerable population is available on all of our ambulances. And finally, we'd just like to thank all the EMS agencies that participated, all of our committees at GTAC, including medical directors, for all of your help with this assessment. So,
Thanks,
are
Sam.
there any questions?
Any questions for Sam?
Sam, the only question is, could you email the members of the committee that presentation?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. All right, number 3 on agenda, report from the work group. This last few weeks, we've had TTAF had a trauma conference. A data conference here that was well attended. We've had multiple meetings. I was with Joe in San Antonio a few weeks ago. NEMSIS had their meeting. Just to keep y'all up to date, so the current EMS data registry is based upon a NEMSIS version 3.3.4 that is currently set to expire or close the end of December this year and move to a version 3.4, which Texas is not. We are currently going through the final steps of validation with NEMSIS on the current data set, or current data registry, so that we can start to submit data. The National EMS of state officials has made the recommendation to push that change from the end of 15 to the end of 17, and we'll see what they do with that, because ultimately the decision is NHTSA's. So we'll see what NHTSA decides to do with that. So for now, Texas is in the final steps, which is good. I expect probably June, July, we'll be able to start submitting data to the data set. Whether we can submit that or continue to submit that to national data set and databases will yet to be seen. My aha moment, I guess, was on a meeting we had Friday with the state folks, is that currently the state is accepting data in multiple different formats and different versions, but my understanding is by the end of this calendar year, agencies submitting data to the state registry must submit it in the NEMSIS version 3.3.4. And so that puts some of us, like my organization is still in a version 2 system, somewhat an interesting position with Texas because the data submission is mandatory. Are there any questions about the data? No? All right. Good enough for government work.
Don't take it personally.
It was a painful meeting.
It was a painful meeting. No, it was. It was a really good meeting. Actually, the data group, Chris and all the guys are doing phenomenal. It's exciting. In fact, I'm hoping that what will happen is the RACs will start to use the data set instead of having all of us submit data to all the RACs, and we'll not hold our breath for that, but we're hoping.
Well, Dr. Peterson, we got to say thank you for you to attend that meeting. When we were in San Antonio, the bus was rolling down the street that would put us in a position where we would start submitting data. Come January 1st, we would stop submitting data because we wouldn't meet the standard anymore. And I am pretty certain that it's going to be pushed back to the end of 2017. And I think the aha moment for that meeting was when someone asked, well, how many states drop off the grid come January 1st? And it was 44 of the 49 states wouldn't be able to submit. So this was having the support from yourself and asking the right questions. Really, I think we've made some great progress.
We'll see.
So do we need to take any action or take this to GTAC to take action?
Nope.
I mean, we've come such a long way.
We have.
I mean, we've struggled with this for so long, and now we actually have something working. That's just.
It'll be nice once we all start submitting to the current data registry, because there's a lot, just even in Texas, regardless of what happens nationally, even in version 3.3.4, we're going to finally be able to do stuff with our data, and everybody will be talking the same language, and I don't know that's ever happened in Texas. So it's a good thing.
And just to remind everybody that all the services that are not submitting have received letters from the state saying you have till January 1st to start submitting data. and if you don't, it will affect your ability to get local project grants, as well as it could affect your license. So, and we're taking the friendly approach now to work with people to get it done, but we're serious. We've
What are you gonna do for those people that have the wrong version, the 2.0?
Well, we're gonna work with them. If they're submitting
That's good.
something, we gotta work with them. But if
No,
they're just flatly refusing to submit anything, those days are done.
Well, I think ultimately those vendors who are on version 2 are end up going away, because version 2 is going. I think they did extend it one more year.
Yeah, I think that goes to the end of next year.
But there's huge expenses, and although the national that has the funding from the federal government to continue to run 2 parallel databases, we don't have that ability in Texas. In fact, I was quite saddened when I heard how our data, not just our EMS data, but trauma and newborn, and I mean, there's probably 20 different registries that in Texas we're given about the same amount, or probably less than we were 5 and 10 years ago with so many registries. So it's kind of sad how little Texas thinks of data and maintenance of its registries, and for what the guys do at the registry, who maintains all those registries on that little budget, is quite impressive.
But we will go from the last state submitting data nationally to one of the first states to be able to submit data nationally that includes hospital data. Very few states will be able to accomplish that, and because of having this one big registry, we can do that now. So they want data from Texas, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we're talking probably somewhere around 4.5 million transports a year. So they want that data into the system. And it'll be nice to be able to go to meetings now and not say, we're working on it.
We will shine for at least 6 months.
Yeah. Now we're going to shine longer.
What are the barriers to reporting besides I don't want to?
Well, it always comes down to money. I think one of the biggest things we've heard in making contact with all these services, it's a registry data, we don't do emergency transports, and we want all of that data. Everyone agrees that the non-emergency stuff that's the real stressor on the system. So I think it's an education. I mean, it's been a requirement since '96 here in Texas, but the registry was so many problems in it. We just had to work it. It is now working, and the reports you're seeing are good reports, and the problems have been fixed. So we had to draw a line, and they're taking us serious now. And we're working with them, so we'll get them there.
Thanks, Joe. All right, Dr. Moore, number 4, discussion and approval of position statements regarding care of patients with behavioral disorders.
Kevin doesn't have.
Who doesn't?
Captain.
Oh, Kathy.
Okay, so let me just say that the Dr. Bradley and Dr. Troutman and I have been sort of emailing back and forth, looking at a document on mental health patients and the changes that needed to be made. Some of them were just typo type things. So at one point it talked about medical personnel, when we really need to talk about EMS personnel, so that was changed. One line was added that shows the problem we get into with psych patients, and let me just read that to you. If the EMS unit crosses county lines with a psych patient, it creates a problem for the receiving hospital emergency department, in that the law enforcement official from the county of origin may not be able or willing to provide a police officer's warrant or an EDW to the receiving ER. And a lot of times, I'm out of quoting now, but that's due to the fact that they don't want to leave their small town and leave them uncovered at 3 in the morning on a Saturday. The document is required by most psych facilities before the patient then can be transported to their psych facility. So it holds up everything if we can't get the legal documents that only the Sheriff's Department can give us right now. We are not authorized as EMS personnel to say somebody is a hazard to themselves or others for mental health reasons. And so we have to rely on the legal folks. Before I go on, let me just read from the mental health law, which is pretty clear about how psych patients should be handled. Under section 573.001, a police officer without a warrant may take a person into custody if the officer has reason to believe and does believe that the patient is mentally ill and may risk harm to themselves or others. Then further down it says the police officer who takes that person into custody shall immediately transport the apprehended person to the nearest appropriate inpatient mental health facility or a mental health facility deemed suitable by the local health authority, or they go to jail, or other options. But it never mentions EMS, medical clearance at hospital ERs, or any of the stuff that has been artificially created by the mental health authorities at our mental health hospitals. They've really just kind of barbecued us without us noticing that we're getting the blunt of it. And they changed the rules. Their medical screening exam 1 week is you have to have a blood alcohol less than 110, and the next week it's 80, and the next week it's 200. It's just depending on which psychiatrist is on that night. It's schizophrenic, really.
It's a little ironic.
Yeah, it's a little ironic. So part of what we're trying to do is decide, can EMS maybe do a police officer warrant or a EMS officer's warrant, or what could we call it? I mean, could EMS do that? Well, that's being done in some areas. Yeah, that would take a legislative change. So the emphasis that we asked to put into our document is that we need to refer back to the law, and that is that the police officers should do the transporting if at all possible. And upon completion of the medical clearance exam, if at all possible, the police officer should be the one to transport to the psych facility. The problem we get into is that an ambulance is nothing but a moving closet or a cabinet, and it has 2 separate doors on it, and the person could suddenly pop their restraints off, unless they're chemically knocked out, and jump out the back of their ambulance and to their death. That I know because we had one, and then our system got sued for allowing a person to do that. It's not our medic. It was a female medic in the back who was way smaller than the patient, and she nearly got dragged out to her death, but was able to hold on to a rail and didn't get thrown out. We shouldn't be transporting clearly, purely psychiatric patients. Now, if we could get the medical screening exam process, and one thing Dr. Trotman suggested is, let me read his statement and see what you think. It's the position of GTAC Medical Directors Committee that a straightforward acute mental health emergencies do not routinely require lab testing and could be medically cleared in the field by EMS personnel. Based on the history, the vital signs, the presentation, local EMS agencies should work with local psych facilities to directly receive patients with mental health disease and work with the law officials for an additional means of transport to the psych facility. There are ways we could do this, like they're doing in Lubbock, if we could convince people across the state to do it that way. So as a committee, we kind of need to decide, do we want to push it one way or the other? What you have that I've handed out is basically everything except what Dr. Troutman added, and we would add that if you think we could go that far. It's a question, as a committee, do you think we can push it that far?
Bill, do you think the current legislative initiatives will impact this with the emergency physicians performing?
No, because I think that just has to do once a
Once
patient
they
presents to
get
the ER.
Okay, so just asking the question then
Yeah.
for it, so, okay.
This is really to hopefully get the patient to the right treatment facility, to the psych hospital, rather than to your emergency room. And I wish we could just go back to the law, which says that the police officer should do that. He's got a cage that they can't get out of. We don't have a cage they can't get out of.
I think it's a convenience thing. I look at it. I feel like I speak so loudly they should hear me in Chicago. I think it's purely an example of, if I can put this position onto someone else's plate where they have to now figure out how to slice it up and deliver it and so forth, I think it's convenience. Unfortunately, I know everyone in the system is overworked. That's the problem with the system. We're all overworked. But if it's in the law, then I would certainly agree with Dr. Moore. We need to put pressure back toward police that they should obey their own law and their regulations and stop it before it gets to the ER.
Well, this is obviously a very complex issue, and I've unfortunately been embedded in it for a long time, to the point that in this legislative session there is a bill that's sitting on the governor's desk for emergency physicians to be able to initiate a 4-hour hold. Not quite what we wanted, but it's a lot better than what we've gotten for the last decade. My personal bias is that I think we've actually dumped on law enforcement with mental health for too long, but that if we cleared patients in the field, this would actually help them out, because they could go to, quote, the right place, and when they get there, they won't get the same pushback that they get now. Because that's the, I mean, you talk to any of the law enforcement, any of the cops, we all know them. You know, they try to go to the place where they can get in and out of the quickest, and like you said, we're all overworked on this. All the rules and the laws don't facilitate the care of these patients. So I think this would actually enable us to work better with law enforcement if we could provide a service in the field to them, almost the ticket to ride, where they could then go to, quote, the most appropriate place rather than the closest place. Now that said, I mean, if somebody clearly has a medical need, if somebody really needs medical clearance, and we do see some of those, but I think all of us know in the room, most of the patients that we see we're doing medical clearance on don't need medical clearance. Yeah, you could medically clear them by saying hi.
Right.
Yeah, and we do. We've medically cleared them in 5 minutes, and then the next 6 hours we're going through the process. 6 hours if we're lucky. So I really support this quite a bit.
How have psych hospitals received this? Because I know the literature shows that the great majority of medical tests are unnecessary for medical clearance, but yet many, at least in our region here, pretty much all of them require all sorts of battering of medical tests in order to clear the patient. So I'm just wondering how that's worked, because I feel like we need to try to work with them. I completely support this, and I think we need to make sure we're working with these psych facilities to ensure that a medical screening exam does not necessarily require laboratory testing that we can't do in the field.
I tell you what, we kind of did in Lubbock, because that was initially, they were, well, we can't take patients without alcohol levels and what have you. So essentially there's a series of setting at the table like this, going over the ACEP clinical policies, which clearly state that we don't need routine lab testing. It should be dictated by physical and vital signs and what have you. And so it took a little bit of convincing, and now we've been doing it for about 45 days, and they completely love it. They're kind of like, why haven't we been doing this for a long time?
Yeah, I think your biggest problem would maybe be your very elderly patients that have delirium associated with some drug, or even a chemotherapy patient who gets a new drug and becomes psychotic for a while. Those are odd. Those are the far, curve of the bell curve. They're not enough that it should affect what we write down, And so if you guys like what Dr. Troutman said, I can certainly present. I'll type that up and present it next time, and we'll get it to you ahead of time so you can have a chance to read it, and then we could. I don't think we should vote on it tonight unless you do.
No, I mean,
I think it's not like it's going to change anything.
Yeah. I'm sorry that I had to step away, but obviously it
Yeah, we can
was
get
a psych
it.
patient call. How appropriate, isn't it? Are you transporting voluntary and involuntary, or just voluntary?
Voluntary.
Voluntary, yeah. So, I mean, today we can transport voluntary patients.
Well, they have a
I think.
good way of convincing people to be voluntary. They
No,
say
there's
you
no-
can either go to jail with me, or you can go
Yeah.
to that nice,
Yeah.
clean hospital where there's a TV and a food.
We
with
actually
those guys.
find some of our patients that we are now taking to the psych hospital, I think if we told them we're taking them to the ER, then they don't want to go. But, a lot of those patients see comfort in going to the psych hospital. We've been there before. Oh, I get to see Dr. So-and-so. So they actually would have been involuntary, but now they're going voluntary, which is helpful.
So that's fine if you want. If you want to put this on the GTAX agenda for next time, just let me know. Right now, it's not on the agenda. So
Why don't we go ahead and put it
I
on
would-
for next time, and we'll put what we've all kind of agreed on into
Okay.
text form and get it.
Right.
Get it to you.
So Bill, with this, I think it's all great information, but it seems like we're having kind of a one-sided conversation. And as we said, we can move this forward with a little more clarity, and that would be great. But are there other entities within the state of Texas processes and systems that we should be having those discussions on, instead of with Dr. Troutman at the local level, but at the state level. Is there a commission, department, or agency where we should formally sit down to have that or to at least start the conversation, see if there is some resolution or compromise language to work through things?
Probably the best places to start, there's a Texas Police Chiefs Association, and then there's a Texas Sheriff's Association.
How about through a state entity, though, not a representative or
well, there's a license. Well, there's the folks that license. I don't know. I'm not law enforcement.
Yeah, I'm blocking on their name. Their acronym.
Yeah.
TCLOS? Yes.
And then you also, from the mental health side, there's the MHMR folks.
That's who I was thinking of, primarily MHMR folks in there, including our law enforcement brethren who are in this realm. But I think it's really on the receiving facility where we think the biggest roadblocks are, and so maybe it is MHMR, or I don't know what the appropriate place is, but maybe
I do agree with you from a law enforcement standpoint. It would be nice from a state level for an interpretation of the law, because I can tell you from police department to sheriff's departments, within departments, there's different interpretations on what they have to do, what they can do, what they should do.
It really is pretty darn straight.
You would think.
You read the law.
You would think.
It never mentions a medical screening exam. Nowhere in here does it say you have to get a medical screening exam.
Well, there's actually an attorney general opinion that says peace officers cannot be required to take somebody for a medical screening exam before taking them to the psych hospital.
Yeah, it was Greg Abbott when he was attorney general.
Right.
He said, you know, the mental health hospital has no statutory authority to require a medical screening exam. So he went all the way back to the hospitals can't require that of the police or your county hospital. So they can't require it, according to the attorney general.
Good. So, Dr. Moore, if you'll take this, I'll get it on the GCHEC agenda, and then we'll bring it back to next meeting.
I'll reword it and get it to you.
All right.
I'll get it to Dr. Troutman first.
Okay.
Make sure we said it right.
Dr. Remick, the transport guidelines?
Dr. Beeson.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't see you there. Yes, ma'am.
I snuck up. I already told you I was. You might include, so DSHS, not this side, but they are who license the psych facilities. MHMR is more regional in focus from the last time they were consolidated. So they probably should, that side of the house probably should be in those discussions. We've just been doing that in our region, bringing all the right people to the table. And so, sorry.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
The MH, Mental Substance Abuse Division, has state hospitals, and then.
Well, so, will this go to GTAC and then somebody from GTAC will proceed further with it?
So my guess is that you're going to rework this and then take it back to GTAC in August
Right.
with a document coming over to the department, and then we'll look at it at that time.
So we all kind of agree on the concept, and we'll just put it in words and then take it to GTAC in August.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. If you read what we already have, it says the state should work with other people.
Sure.
That's the big scheme. And we've all had these meetings with our local hospitals and mental health authorities. And unfortunately, and I don't mean this as negatively as it's going to sound, but what they say they'll do and what happens are not the same. Because everybody says, oh, of course we'll take the patients without a medical screening exam. But then the person on call, which, when it comes down to it, says, oh, I got to have an alcohol level. So it's getting that information down.
Yes.
Hi, Derek Jakovich with DSHS. That one bill you mentioned, Dr. Greenberg, I know we're monitoring that because that's one of the ones that's come through the regulatory side that we're monitoring, and assuming it passes, then we're probably going to be looking at rules to implement that legislation as it affects those general hospitals with the psych units, as I recall, as well as the psych freestanding facilities. So your document flowing through, and probably assuming it passes later this summer, fall, there's probably going to be a rules effort as well to implement that.
So does a judge have to rule after the 4-hour time period, or a JP or a police officer of some sort?
I don't recall it specifically.
You can get either a peace officer to do another, depends on, there's so many different names for them. Another warrant, yeah, or an APOW or a OED, yeah, an emergency detention, or get it from the judge. Quite frankly, my hope is with this, and without going into a prolonged discussion, is a physician having the ability to hold somebody will allow us to not have to hold so many people. Because as it is now, if you don't, yeah, it's just like the patient with belly pain. It's easy to tell the surgeon, I'd operate on that. But if you're the surgeon, you think about it a little bit more. So right now, it's easy for us to ask somebody else to do something. If it's our authority, first of all, we're there so we can wait. And second of all, I think we'll be able to deal with our patients a whole lot better having this authority. So that should help.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Emick now. Nobody else is standing up after.
Sure. So I believe at our last meeting, we presented the initial draft for the pediatric transfer and transport recommendations and/or guidelines, and there were a few very minor edits that were suggested by the committee. And I'm actually going to have Sally Snow maybe come up and speak on this because she was the lead writer and represents the pediatric committee in terms of moving this forward. So.
Do we have a copy?
Do you have a copy for something digital we can read, or is it up there?
I
No,
don't,
that's
you
fine.
know what, it's on the additional documents on the GTAC website.
Under what committee?
Well, it's just under additional documents, under meetings and documents, meeting notifications and documents. There's three additional documents right underneath the agendas for each committee, and it's one of them. It's called Considerations for Pediatric Transfer, Consultation and Transfer. It does have the recommendations from this committee from last time in February incorporated. They were very minor changes, and they are incorporated in this draft. We had hoped to have the subcommittees that need to weigh in on this do so at this meeting, but it was inadvertently left off of some of the agendas. So some committees did have it on. Both of the committees that I've been to so far, Air Medical and EMS, both wanted a little more time to review it. We were also asked to send it to all the RAC chairs and ask them to vet it through their committees, either pediatric or whatever committee they have that has oversight over pediatrics in their RAC, which Christine's going to do this afternoon at the RAC chairs meeting. So we were asking for each committee's endorsement at this meeting, but now have more time to do that, and hopefully we'll at least get some endorsement next GTAC meeting so that we can take it to the big GTAC to serve as the state's considerations for pediatric consultation and transfer. This is a purely voluntary document. It is not intended to change or interrupt any existing referral patterns at all. It's just an opportunity for people to adopt a set of criteria that might lead to the need for a higher level of care based on some physiologic and mechanism of injury type criteria and other criteria. The section that talks about specialty transport teams was lifted directly from the Health and Safety Code, so that's already in rule as it exists today.
So, Dr. Emmett, can you get with Sally? I know the one I'm looking at here that's on the documents has got lots of highlights and personal comments. Can you get the draft that's before the next meeting so I can distribute to the committee so that we can discuss next time?
Yeah, happy to do that.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sally.
You're welcome.
Dr. Malone, Community Paramedic Work Group.
I certainly am. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have for each of the committee members.
Microphone.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me now? I have a 2-page handout for each of us at the table, and on the screen you will see what we are going to be talking about. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but listening to Jody earlier today, I realized there are people listening and watching by web that sometimes don't see what we see. So my my task was to look at this advanced practice paramedicine, mobile integrated healthcare, community healthcare. All of these titles refer to something that is already in existence, and there is evidence that mobile integrated healthcare and community paramedicine systems have a dramatic and positive effect that not only reduces the number of emergency calls, but also improves the quality of healthcare and the quality of life in specific patient populations. In fact, the talk by Jack Ayers was very helpful at our symposium, at the NICTRAC symposium about advanced practice paramedicine and mobile integrated healthcare. There is, however, something we can identify out of all of this, and this is the subject of what I want to tell you. There is a minimum set of core material that can be identified. In fact, if you look at all of these programs, even across the U.S., you'll find that there is a standard set of knowledge, and I'm going to call that the core. And that core is universal. It's universal because these are the diseases that the patients manifest.
Can we advance that to the second
Oh.
page, which has the core?
Yes, would you advance up to page 2, please? Thank you very much. And these things we see over and over again. What's that core? Well, it's cardiology, it's pulmonology, it's nephrology, endocrinology, and it's the neuropsychiatric and the behavioral health sciences. Now, this is what we need to have these advanced practice personnel understand. Whether it's adult, whether it is adolescent, whether it is geriatric, whether it is pediatric. If you look at, for example, we've talked earlier today about asthma and recurring problems with asthma. That's part of pulmonology. So we can identify what the core is. And I believe that what we need to do, and what I would recommend that we do as a committee, is to form a work group consisting of members from the GTAC Education Committee and the GTAC Medical Directors Committee, and that we come together and we begin to work on defining and refining what that is going to look like. But certainly there is a core of material that's utilized over and over in this type of care. And the outcomes that we will have from putting this together, coming up with what we believe to be the way to teach this material, it's going to allow the system medical director to be able to define and to tailor what is needed in his or her area. But the core knowledge, the core medical knowledge, will remain the same, whether that's Del Rio or Alpine or Houston or Dallas. And I'd like to, that's what I'm bringing to you, is forming a committee to look at this further.
Okay, so I need to get that on GTAC's next agenda, Dr. Malone, to form somewhat a committee. I'll tell you that there's multiple things going on nationally. Obviously, NSIMSO has been working with NSIMC, the educators, to come up with some curriculum. I was actually in Denver on Monday and Tuesday. There are certain states that are probably the farthest ahead. They picked it up as a state thing and not a national thing. I know that NSIMSO, the state EMS officials, has a format of creating, in a sense, in addition, not really a new certification, but they call it a waiver. There's various things. What do they call it, Joe?
Special credentialing.
Special
Specialized
credentialing, thank you. That I think probably is going the way Texas needs to go. We never did it with critical care, paramedic, and we all know how that turned out. I don't know that waiting for something nationally is a good thing. I am worried that the folks who created the critical care medic and the flight medic certification exams have advertised that they're giving their first exam in November, but having talked to their executive director Monday, they don't have a core curriculum and they don't know what they're testing, and they haven't formed the test yet, but they already have a date that they're going to give it. So it kind of worries me how well this is going to work out.
And we are the members of the GTAC committees that need to be addressing this issue, because Texas being a medical direction by medical director, local medical director state, this is perfect for what we do. We'll credential them to do what we want them to do, but they've got to have this core body of knowledge, and that's what I'm talking about.
So I'll get it on.
We're talking roughly 200 and some odd hours.
You know, the first course, if I could just speak for a minute about what I've done, not to end all and be all here, but the first time we taught this course, we did it in 412 hours. That was wonderful because we had a lot of time to repeat. You know, it was repetitive learning in the classroom. Fire departments cannot afford that, neither can private providers for that matter. So we honed that down to 208 hours. Now that means there's a lot of homework to do, but that gave us the time for classroom hours, 72 hours of clinical hours, and it really is, if you'll let me just look back at my page here, what I want to just re-highlight is really, we are, by doing all of this, we're teaching them what they need to know. We are making sure that they have the knowledge and the capacity to interact with physicians. They've got to know how to talk and how to communicate so that they can do medical terminology and do the therapeutic communications. And then finally, we've got to be able to see them in clinicals to know that they actually really can do what we believe that they can do. And those are the three parts that need to come together and be solidified, so that then we can say to a medical director, let me just pick Del Rio, because I have Del Rio on my heart for some reason. So let's pick Del Rio, and we can say, you know, Madam Medical Director of Del Rio, we have put this paramedic through 208 hours, which include 157 hours of classroom hours in these subjects, along with 72 hours of clinical experiences in these subjects. And we've given them an exam that will at least let us believe that they've passed that. Now, you look at them again and decide, are you willing to credential them to do X, Y, and Z? And what that X, Y, and Z is, up to that local medical director.
So I think it would be in order for you, when you give your report, to ask the council, actually the chair of the council, to assign the task force. And I'd recommend it be medical directors, EMS, and education all together. But without that being on the agenda, I'm pretty sure it's within the rules for the task force to be able to be assigned at this meeting.
Okay.
I don't think it has to be an agenda item.
I don't think so either.
Okay.
Because I looked up the procedural rules. It says at any time the council chair can appoint a task force. So if
Sharon ought to be the owner for Jeremy.
Okay.
yeah, so if you have volunteers from the committee that you can suggest at the meeting tomorrow, I think
Okay.
that can happen.
All right. We'll take that. Sharon, you'll obviously volunteer.
I would
Yep.
love to.
Okay.
So I'd make that as a motion.
And I'll,
We have a motion
second,
and a second.
but I'll
Second.
Sharon, I'll volunteer.
All right. Jeff and Sharon.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Any question, discussion on that motion? Anybody out there? She's sitting down. Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
It's too easy without Eric and Dudley.
Thanks. Dr. Malone, do you have anything on Narcan? Or?
I do. It's very interesting. Senate Bill 1462 has passed the Senate, and it has been sent to the House for Public Health Committee, where it is currently sitting.
It ain't going anywhere though. Things have to be out of committee today if they're
Okay.
going to be acted on.
I checked. I checked yesterday. I checked this morning
Yeah.
before the meeting.
It hadn't had a hearing yet?
Right.
If it hadn't had a hearing, I don't think it's going to get out.
And that was just the bill that was going to make Narcan.
It would make it not a crime for someone else to have a prescription for naloxone who could intervene.
To have, yeah, okay, to
Yes.
administer to somebody else. Okay.
So just know that House Bill 225 did pass the House and the Senate, which is a Good Samaritan bill, which allows you to give drugs for overdoses. And it protects you from prosecution. So that might be the mechanism.
Maybe
for
they can
moving
mesh
it.
that.
And that passed today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So number 8, the talks about the break or the gap in continuity between the medical practice and the DSHS rules. I talked to Dr. Purse. He still thinks there's something that needed to be done. I need a volunteer to please work with Dr. Purse, or maybe 2. And this has been on the agenda for many, many meetings and it hasn't gone anywhere. And I know Dr. Purse is passionate about it. So can somebody volunteer to get with Dr. Purse and maybe bring some recommendations to the committee next time?
I can, since I'm down there.
Thank you,
I
Dr.
thought
Bradley.
what we were going to do was come up with draft language for the medical director's agreement, because we don't have that now. There's no standardized
Okay.
I hate to say contract, but the agreement between the medical director and the service.
Okay.
I thought we had.
So I'll get with you, Dr. Bradley and Dr. Person, make sure we get something before next time.
Dr.
All right.
Beeson, as
Yes.
you go through that, if there's something, we're drafting rules right now. So if there's something we can do in rules and go through that process, this is the time we should have that dialogue, okay?
Okay.
Over the next couple months, please.
Well, that ma-
Before the next meeting?
Yeah, before August, no. Now, we have time. I mean, my best guess is the GTAC will see the draft rules for their final adoption in like November. But we're working on them, so this is time to put that language, we can float it out to the community, get support for it, and just make it smoother as we push it forward.
This is on the council agenda for tomorrow too. This item's on the council agenda for tomorrow. So I don't remember where the discussions were. I'm sorry,
Well,
I forget my memory. But
what
I
it
thought what
talked
we
about-
decided was, coming up with draft language for an agreement between the EMS medical director and the provider
Right.
that would address some of these concerns, making that in rule that it has to exist.
Right. So ultimately, what the gap is, that it says what the medical director's responsibilities are. 157 says also that a medical director, but in a sense, there's some clause that in a sense will hold the provider. Well, it's not really my problem if they don't do that. It's
Well-
his problem, and it kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah, that's in the medical board rule, though. One of the items in the medical board rule says the medical director will not be held responsible if the EMS provider does not provide whatever.
Right.
So, which is a good thing, but it also lets both of them kind of off the hook.
Okay.
So our suggestion, again, this is coming back to me when I talked with Purse and when he presented here and at the TMA, we thought the way to address it best is to have that agreement, like you have a first responder agreement, a mutual aid agreement,
Okay.
have an official agreement between the medical director and the EMS service that says exactly what they will provide.
So
They
it's-
will provide for a QI service, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That would be in the contract then, basically, that the provider would need to have a contract that includes the following.
Well, one's an employment contract and another's just an agreement to be medical director, so.
So is there anything that you want to take to the committee tomorrow, the council tomorrow, or do we need to wait?
Yeah, and I thought we had done this, but I would move that we take it forward to the council to make a recommendation to the state to develop model language for a contract, not a contract, so you had me do that. An agreement between the medical director and EMS service that outlines the responsibilities of each.
Okay?
You got all that?
Second.
Did you get all that?
Whatever
Did he get that?
said, I second.
Yeah, I don't think he got that. He's right, but he didn't get it.
Well, just whatever he gets.
I got my shorthand. All right, motion second. Any discussions on that? All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll take that to the council tomorrow.
And Mason has to take this to Dr. Person.
Yes,
Yes, I'll get with you, Dr. Bradley.
because we're going to need the specifics.
All right, number 9 is talking about an issue that's come, there's another gap between EMS students and relationships or training agreements between providers for internships and preceptorships. Currently, the medical director of the educational establishment or educational institution is responsible for many things, and one of those is approving the curriculum and their clinical recommendations, guidelines where they train. But unfortunately, after talking with Joe and what's come up on a national scale with the accreditation of paramedic programs, is that an EMS student comes to one of our organizations to do rotations, and they're technically practicing under our license, but they're not on the personnel list, and we don't have any idea that our provider has signed a training agreement with an educational institution. And even further, I feel pretty confident that if a student did something in error, not only would it come up to us, but the preceptor, EMT or medic, who is precepting that student would potentially also be responsible. And that's never really been discussed, at least from a medical director standpoint. So I know that Joe has been working with organizations based upon the national accreditation that if you have a student, if we have students coming into Texas to do rotations, which occurs, Joe is requiring that the medical director of that provider be aware and approve them to come in. But there is currently no requirement that any EMS education and provider training agreement have any medical director input. And so I drafted this thing that has all of the laws and the rules, and ultimately that the medical director, the summation here is the medical directors committee of GTAC recommends DSHs immediately take action to correct these deficits. In addition, we recommend the department require medical director's signature on clinical and field internship agreements, stating that the provider medical license has temporary delegated practice to approve students during clinical internships with the provider. Is there any questions or discussions about them? I know you had some issues, Craig, in San Antonio a while back about this.
Absolutely, and so very supportive of this initiative, and thank you for driving it to the state level. So one question would be, when I look at, there's some kind of quasi-education components. There's formal initial education versus folks coming in for clinical rotation, observation periods, things like that. Would you believe or support those, that be included in this process?
I don't know how the state deals with that. I do agree that that may be something in the medical director's agreement that we talk about other people coming in to write out. But I know the particular issue that concerns me are these students that really, I don't know where they're from. I don't know who they belong to. If
absolutely.
Somebody is a certified...
There's no awareness of the medical director that these folks are out there
right.
Performing duties in whatever capacity. So I would say that absolutely, but if we can not limit it to initial education programs, but find the appropriate wording for all of those other educational entities so that the medical director has visibility on who's out there working under their license.
So do you have some recommended wording to add?
Dr. Greenberg's the wordsmith here.
How did that happen to me?
No. So I think just that if you made it something as simple as that of not specifying that it's initial education, but individuals participating in medical care under a training or clinical observation.
Oh, that's good.
So the wording here is on clinical and field internship agreements. So it doesn't just say initial education. Would you rather?
Don't we have a position statement about learners in the EMS?
Yeah, we discussed this a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think we already have a position statement. I do like the thought of putting this in the medical director EMS service agreement, though.
Okay.
Or should that be the rule, as we're in a rule development process?
That would be.
Well, I know we have a position on trainers, but there's still no requirement that the medical director
That's right.
be aware.
And I think that's the meat of this, is that we're asking that be put into the rule, that at a minimum, as the provider medical director, I have to sign on the application that says on the agreement between the initial education and the provider. So that signature is not required. What we're asking for is that be a requirement, and that's a rule thing. At least I think it's a rule.
You know, if I could just add, if you want to be a first responder organization, you're not the transporting agency. You have to have an affiliation with a transporting agency, and that transporting agency's medical director has to sign that you may be an FRO. So that language like that would cover this situation in the rule would be very helpful, in my opinion.
So in 2013, we approved a position statement. I don't know if this is sufficient, but number 3 position was DSHS should add a requirement to program approval regulations that requires the EMS system medical director's approval on any affiliation agreements between EMS systems and training programs. Is that adequate to what you're asking for?
Other than?
It doesn't include the non-training programs, so like clinical observers or participants, whether that be nurses or other health.
Yeah, so the first position was, while functioning within an EMS system, all practicing providers and students fall under the authority of the EMS medical director. Well, we agree with that. We just want to know about them. So we didn't say we know about them. And then number 2, the affiliation agreement between an EMS system and the training program should reflect the authority of the EMS medical director for all care provided. So, I mean, I guess it could all still happen without our knowledge, but I don't know if this manages what we're looking for or not.
Well,
So I
states
can-
our position, but it doesn't put it in rule.
So I can say very clearly that, so with COAMs requiring a letter coming to the state when out-of-state students are riding here doing ALS skills and working in hospitals and or in ambulances. Of the 4 schools that I've been dealing with, about 70% of the doctors had no clue the students were even here. And so what we put into place is that we'll give you that letter of acknowledgement for COAMs to be accredited as long as you give us documentation from the physician that he or she is aware that the students are riding there. And it was really interesting because some of the docs had no clue at all.
So I think we already have a position statement on this, so it needs to be put into rule.
And just to clarify the distinction there is when I filled that out for our students from Wyoming.
Sure.
I said that I'm aware of it. And I think what we're asking for is that we actually have to participate in the approval of those agreements. And then our signature be put on.
So other
What I'm saying is,
recommendations?
that's not a new recommendation from we did that 2 years ago.
So,
Did it ever go to GTAC?
Yes.
I wasn't here
Pretty
2 years
sure.
ago yet.
We can take it again, but I'm pretty sure.
so
it did.
Jeff, would it be helpful if I made a motion to reiterate our support for that position?
And you can do that, Doctor, but I hear the concern. I would just suggest, let's look at the new rules as they're coming out, the new drafts. Let's make sure we have it covered there.
Right.
And it'll go through the approval process that way. I hear the message. I agree with you 100%, and I can assure you we're going to add language.
Where were you 2 years ago?
All right, so no action?
I just sent that to y'all and to Joe.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
So it wasn't a quorum.
Anything else you guys want to,
I would just ask, of the DISH's approved EMS medical director's course, do we know how many people have completed that? And
Wait, you read my notes, didn't you?
I didn't. I have
So-
a copy of the course here.
So it's just a reminder, it was over 200, I don't have the exact number, they just said it was over 200 doctors have taken the course. Remember that it expires September 1st, it'll cost you $400 after September 1st. We may have some funding to do it another year, but I can't guarantee that. So please, if you know anybody who needs it, I just keep repeating it over and over, take a course while it's free. After that, it'll cost you.
Do we know how many EMS medical directors are there?
You would ask.
welcome to the table.
So naive.
The original question
I believe
ever
the
asked.
last 20 years we've been asking that
But I know
question.
now the TMB asked that question.
Yeah, they do.
We would, well, that's right. Somewhere around 600 to 700, I would suspect.
Yeah, TMA should know the answer to that
Yeah,
within
they
2
definitely
years.
know. And we could find it.
Well, and everybody recertify or relicense.
Right, well, that's 2 years,
That's
so.
been going on.
Takes 2 years,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Unless they lie.
We're getting close.
So, what about Dr. Beeson's position as medical advisor? Can you update us on his job, please?
No.
Yes.
Sure. So the job description is being reviewed internally within the department so there's no confusion on the role. So it's under consideration. That's all I can say.
Is there a timeline?
No.
It's under consideration.
You don't get to answer this.
Well,
You're
we'll-
excluded.
We'll talk offline. Thank you. Anything else?
I have one more thing,
Oh, yeah.
just for information only. I passed out earlier, the managers worked on a quality assurance plan development tool that you have in front of you. And we can send it out electronically. As we go out and do surveys, a lot of services have the question, well, what do you expect inside a quality improvement plan? So the managers worked on this, did a really good job on putting a document together. This is not a toolkit, but it's something they should consider. It's for your input to look at. Email me anything you think we missed or we should add to it. We're not going to be going to GTAC for formal approval or anything, but at least we showed it with you guys and with the EMS committee also to seek any other things that we might have missed. And that's all I have, sir.
Good, thank you.
Dr. Beeson, just one other point of information to keep everybody updated on the DEA and their considerations of rulemaking as we discuss that. They are currently looking at continued rule writing specifically to EMS. They're continuing that process through the summer, anticipate a fall federal coordination and then public comment period probably in late fall, earlier at the beginning of the year. So everybody should just be prepared to rapidly review that and provide input. I think they're currently looking at a 60-day turnaround time for public input for that process. And there are some other initiatives that are being looked at along with the DEA regulation rulemaking process.
Thanks, Craig. In addition to that, I should let everybody know that the NHTSA has a grant going through NSIMSA right now, developing EMS performance measures on a national level. It's called the EMS Compass Project. And they have open suggestions, I believe, until the end of this month. If you have suggestions on evidence-based performance measures, not just clinical, but other things related to EMS, that you can do as submissions, and it's emscompass.org. All right. Any comments from the purple shirts? None? You only have 3 minutes left. All right. Do we have a? So we have one from a red shirt.
I have a real quick one.
Come on.
I was out of the room for another call on red light cameras, but I heard that you were talking about the Narcan bill, Carol Alvarado's bill earlier.
Right.
Is that one that came up? That one I think was right that it hasn't moved, but I was doing some research last night and I found another bill that has the same description, the exact same caption of what the bill is, which is HB 225 by Guillen. And I sent it to the Injury Prevention Committee yesterday, and they've looked at it and said that with the Senate amendments, it appears to do the same thing. That one has passed out of both the House and the Senate. The Senate passed a different version, so at this point, the House would either have to concur and accept those amendments or get a conference committee, but that one actually has moved pretty far, so it might be worth taking a look at. It's HB 225.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
And then what's the company who makes the auto injector of Narcan again? For $600, you should buy stock now. What's that?
You are on tape, sir.
I'm not saying I'm going to buy stock.
Since you brought one of those companies up, for those folks, EpiPens is always a issue for that. And so if you are fortunate to be in a not-for-profit organizational entity, the manufacturer of the EpiPens actually provides a grant program. You have to go on their website and apply for it. I think I've had 3 agencies who've been accepted over the last 6 months to have EpiPens provided to their service, but it is only for not-for-profit entities that can apply for that grant process. So
Good.
it may save you some money if you're able to do that. So.
Good information, because they're a couple $100 a piece now.
If you'd send me that information, we'll put it in our newsletter.
Sure.
Get it out.
I'm sure the company will love me for that, but yeah, absolutely.
Anything else? Do we have a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn, thank you. With a minute left.
Excellent leadership.